Hello and welcome to Know Your Ancestors. I am Megan Hillier, the host of this podcast, and I'm excited to talk to you today about one of the coolest experiences in my whole life, standing where my Welsh ancestors lived. So in 2024, the summer of 2024, I went to Wales with a lot of my family members to celebrate 100 years since my grandma had left Wales. She left Wales in 1924 when she was 4 years old and came to Alberta, Canada. My brother actually had the idea for us to go to Wales to kind of celebrate 100 years, pretty much just an excuse to go to Wales and to visit where my ancestors came from. Now, my mom had gone before, like when I was a teenager, I believe. She went back with her sister and her mom. They visited London and they went to Wales and visited things there. But my brother is very smart and he is totally into geography and he had learned how to speak Welsh. And so he was really into this and we made this trip into a very cool experience. Most of the planning was all him, but it was really cool to be able to stand where my ancestors stood, to be able to visit the churches that they would have gone to find their headstones, to find the homes that they lived in. I would say it was transformational for me. So, like I said, preparing for the trip, we had to look at the research that we already had. There'd already been a lot of documentation because other family members had gone to Wales, cousins, aunts, uncles, mostly uncles, had gone to Wales, and my mom and her sister had gone. And so they already knew some of the locations. Like we knew the House of Bryn in Abersoch, which was where my grandma was born, and where her mother was also born, where her grandmother lived and helped raise my grandma until she was 4. So we knew where that house was, right? We knew where Penrall was, which is another house where my second great-grandmother was born, my great-grandma's mom, where she was born. So we knew where that house was. And maybe there was a few other locations, some churchyards where there was headstones and things. But there was some other houses that we had to map out to make sure we had the right place. So I don't know if you know, in Wales, each of the houses have a name. So they don't have addresses with like house numbers and streets. At least where my ancestors lived, they all have a name. So the house Bryn was the house where my grandma was born. But sometimes there's several houses that have the same name. So we have to, look at photos that we have to compare and make sure we have the right ones. And also just looking at old maps and seeing what houses existed back then. Right. So that was a lot of what my brother did. He found these old maps to be able to kind of compare with what is there today to see if we found the right houses. And my part in preparation for it, I helped a lot with looking at the records that we had, marriage records, birth records, and death records to try to look for as many locations that we actually had. We kind of stopped at our second great-grandparents. We didn't go much further. We did go to maybe some third great-grandparents, but I mean, we could have done way more research and found way more locations, but we didn't want it to be super overwhelming. And we had a lot of nephews and nieces coming and other family members that maybe weren't as into looking at ancestor homes. I'm not sure. So we kept it to kind of third great-grandparents and earlier, and closer. Later, I guess, earlier, whatever, be able to find those places. What I did to prepare was to research these ancestors and learn a bit about them to be able to tell their story. I even made Instagram little videos about my great-grandparents and their parents. So I made these 6 little videos to not only help me understand who they were, but then hopefully my siblings and parents and nieces and nephews, and then also my son was there too, that they could watch these videos and at least get a little bit of an understanding about who these ancestors were. But as we prepared those things, we started noticing little details. Like, for instance, my great-grandma, her father died 11 months before she was born. So then I went and ordered her birth record, and sure enough, there's no father listed on her birth record. She always called him her father. Maybe she was told that he was her father. Maybe she didn't even know. But that kind of opened up some questions in the research. And then looking at who his parents were, we have some stories about his parents and just the information we have on our family tree didn't match with the headstone that we located for this grandfather of my great-grandma. Anyways, so there's kind of some pieces, and if you've done Welsh research, you know that it can be quite difficult because it seems like everyone was named William Jones, or there's a lot of Joneses in my family tree. Joneses marrying Joneses, and it is just really hard to make sure you have the right ancestors. But it was a lot of fun, and I am constantly reminded of the research I need to continue to do on this family line to be able to verify the information that we have. But with that, with the stories and then the locations, we kind of created a list of locations that we wanted to go to, churches with cemeteries that we wanted to visit, headstones, homes that they lived in, and then also weaving in historical locations. There's a lot of castles in Wales, and we hiked Snowdonia, which is, I think, the largest mountain in Wales, at least, maybe UK. I'm not sure. There might have been one taller in Scotland. Anyway, so we hiked that and visited a slate museum, slate factory, and just different places that helped us to understand the area and just to see those places, because probably not going to go to Wales, at least for a long time, even though I would love to go back. So most of my siblings came, my parents, nieces and nephews, some in-laws, and then my son was there too. So when we went there, it was actually surprisingly sunny. I guess it's not usually that sunny and warm as it was when we were there. We were able to visit. The ocean was right close to where we were staying, so we could walk to the ocean. And just to think of my ancestors living in this like 30 square mile area for at least 4 generations, 5 generations, even more. It was like a magical feeling. This whole time I was there, just felt like a sense of belonging, and a sense of connection to the land. Hilary Giovanni, who I had on the podcast a couple months ago, in her book, she describes this word, this Gaelic word called dúthchas. Don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's a Gaelic concept of connection to ancestral land. And this like longing, says it can be used to describe a feeling of connection with ancestral land and the hereditary characteristics passed down through families in relation to place. That like I had all of these ancestors from my grandma to however many hundreds of years that we know that there are people in this location in northern Wales, a deep, deep connection that had been passed down, this connection to this land. And I could feel that, like almost tangibly. And I have a longing, even still now that I've gone there, I have a longing to go back, to be able to feel the land, to be able to explore it deeper and in a different way. It's a powerful feeling. And there were kind of 2 standout moments of this trip. The one was going to a church in Llanengen, where my second great-grandfather was a choir director. So my brother found a bunch of newspaper articles about him, about that he was a choir director. We already did know that he was, but just to learn a bit more about him. We got the keys for the church, and my brother had been learning Welsh, and we sang some hymns together, and then my brother sang some hymns, some Welsh hymns, and we just all kind of hummed parts in the background. I come from a very musical family. My mother, who this second great-grandfather would be her great-grandfather, she's been a choir director for her whole adult life, and she kind of led us singing, and I don't know, I could hardly sing. I was like crying so much. I had to step away and record some videos of them singing, and I just felt him there. It's like, why would he not be there? Right? That here he has his great-granddaughter and her children and their children visiting his precious church. Anyways, I felt ancestors really close there. So that was a very cool experience. Then the other really cool one I actually shared on my Instagram account yesterday, on Monday this week, and it was looking for my third great-grandfather's headstone. So the day before, I think it was my brother who had been kind of looking at ancestry trees, or maybe it was me, I can't even remember, but we found this public ancestry tree of someone with the same third great-grandfather. and they actually had his burial location. So we looked it up and we decided to go there to go see if we could find it. And we decided to drive there. It was, I mean, all in Wales. There are these little windy roads that you don't think you can even drive two cars on them. You have to wait for a little outlet to be able to let a car pass. But we turned off the main road and it looked like it just was a farm, an old abandoned farm. Like there were old buildings. There was some farm machinery that looked newer there, but there was these old buildings that were basically in ruins. And then we followed the road, Google Maps was telling us where to go. So who knows, right? So there was a gate that we had to open and go through. And then there's this little path driving through a field and another gate. I think there's two more gates that we had to go through. And eventually we arrived and there was this church on the side of the road. In the middle of this field, we learned that there had actually been a lake there that they drained. And this church had been on an island. And you would access it by boat until the 19th century when they drained it. So we arrived there, we parked on the side of the road, and the gate was locked. Luckily, the wall of the church was 2 feet tall. So it's just this rock wall. So we just climbed over and began looking for John Griffith, who died in 1876. I found several John Griffiths, but the dates didn't match. And eventually my mom found it. The headstone was kind of hard to read because there was so much growth on the headstone, not even sure what it's called, but kind of crusty little growth on there. And we read that his daughter, who died when she was 25, was also buried with him in 1884, a few years after he had died. And the way that we knew for sure that it was him was not only that the dates were the same, but it listed the name of the house that he was from. They did that in Wales, which is actually very helpful to differentiate one John Griffith from another, right? And so we knew that that was the house he lived in because we had found them on census records earlier. They came from a town probably about 10 miles away. They had moved to this location for the census before, and his children remained in that area, but his wife went back to where she was from after he died. And so this kind of little connection to this location that ended up being kind of far from where his family actually originated. I'm guessing he went there for work to live in this location and to be buried there. But then to imagine, we went to their house that they were living at, to imagine their trek from that little house to this church, again, just felt a connection to the land and to these ancestors that would have lived there, would have walked there. Now that it's been almost 2 years since we went, I've been thinking about what I wish we would have done differently. And one of those things was, first of all, the data, internet coverage in Northern Wales is a little spotty. So there are a few things we would have done differently. One is I would have wanted to have an actual printed booklet, and we would have had a few copies for family members to see. One that, would have the list of locations, the ancestor backstory of that location, why it mattered, and even some historical context of that town or that location that they lived in to really understand a little more about what life might have been like there, what the industry was like there, or what the people were like, what the population of that town might have been when they lived there. It's just different things like that that help to bring context to our ancestors' lives. I feel like that would have helped the other people there that maybe hadn't done as much research as me and my brother, but to be able to feel that connection as well. And this is a tip if you are planning a trip too, to make it into something tangible that you can actually look at as you're there, so you're not constantly flipping to your phone to verify or to read stories. We also did make a Google My Map with all the locations, which was helpful, but again, it was great for getting there, but then it wasn't always accessible and it was hard to see, and it would have been great to have a printed thing. So since then, I've learned a lot more about looking at our own culture, where we come from, our ancient culture even, and understanding some of the practices and the traditions and the history of that land. I would have loved to have dove into that even more before we went there. But now that I have a sense of the land and sense of understanding of what that area was like, I feel like if I dive into that more now, I can feel more connection there too. So obviously not everyone wants to do this sort of trip, right? Some people, I was talking to my my father-in-law before I went to Wales, and he was kinda like, "Why do you even wanna go? You can just look it up on Google Earth, right? You can look at those locations there." I think most people understand that there's a power actually standing on the land, actually seeing what it was like, breathing the air, feeling the climate, feeling the weather, seeing the trees and the sheep that are running in the fields and seeing these old buildings that have withstood hundreds of years. It's a powerful thing. So if you have the chance to do this sort of trip, I encourage you to take it and to look deeper at the locations that you can visit. Understand the history of the area, understand your ancestor's story, to not just know, okay, this is the church that they were baptized in, but maybe to find some context, like what was their father's occupation? How would that have compared to others in the area? Were they well off? Were they not? How many siblings did they have before he was born? How many siblings might have passed away as babies or young children? Looking at like what their life was actually like is really powerful. So I do actually do this for people, do an ancestral journey map. If you are going on a trip this summer, or you anticipate going on a trip at some point, or you are aspiring to go on a trip at some point to visit your ancestral homelands, and you want help with like mapping it out and creating that booklet that you can print out and take with you to really understand these locations, I help you help find about 5 to 10 locations that you can visit in your ancestral homeland to understand what their life was like and to see those actual locations, the land that they lived, or those churches where they attended, or those cemeteries where they are buried. It's a powerful experience, and it can help you feel more connected and more rooted in your origins, to understand who you are and to understand who your family was and to understand where you come from. So if you'd like to look into doing that, you can just go to my website and find that there right on the homepage, or you can send me a message and we can chat about what is possible. So thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. I hope that it's inspired you to start learning about where your ancestors come from. And maybe they're closer. Maybe they've lived in Canada, United States for generations, but have you visited there? Have you been able to find the land that they lived on? And if not, I encourage you to discover that, to go there and to look at it. And as you're there, to think about what their life was like there and to feel into that connection to them. All right. Thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next week.